Oh, okay. Did you want me to start again or? Um, I'm going to be
Yeah, if you
talking.
wouldn't mind.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to be talking about Deepwater alien residents. And I do mean residents. I'll be explaining that a little bit later on. I was uh, uh, basically I'm a scuba diver and a field investigator, which I became both in 2001. And so my interest, of course, went toward water. So I'm going to explain what I have found in my research, and it's going to really surprise you because it surprised me. Okay. Whoop. Now I can't move forward. I think this stayed on too long. There we go. Let me see if it'll go back now. Okay, now I'm going. A few years ago, I had the people from New York MUFON. They were involved in starting up a paranormal section of their local museum, a MUFON section. This is in Pine Bush, New York. They asked me if I would donate something toward the museum that had to do with water. So I made this map. I had it spread out in my office here. It's 4 foot by 6 foot. And what I did was I put a dot on oceans and seas. I didn't do anything inland, and I was surprised that I had over 300 dots. Some of them I could probably go several layers high, especially in the Caribbean. The Every dot that you see here has a longitude and a latitude, and on the map that I sent there in the museum, an exact location and what kind of a ship it was on. So there's a lot of activity going on in and around our oceans and seas. Just a lot of people aren't out there to see it. What are the key factors to consider? Well, let's start with resident. We call aliens visitors. Are they really? Uh, the definition of resident is living in a place for some length of time, residing. Colonization, well, that occurs when any one or more species populate an area. Seems kind of familiar, huh? That you hear stories about how they have been here back and forth, not necessarily visiting, but I believe they're living underwater and have been for a long time because 70% of our Earth is covered by water. And according to NOAA, which is a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, we've explored less than 5% of our vast waterways. We know more about the moon and more about Mars than we know about underneath our oceans and our seas. 1 in 5 UFO sightings are water related. Interesting enough, on January 11th of 2022, the Pentagon decided to open up an office in Washington, D.C. to investigate the study of UAPs and report findings to Congress. And there were so many reports that were water related that within 6 months, they had decided that they were going to focus on water related sightings. These are just a few government pictures that I've come across. The ones through with the circles are obviously from a periscope from submarines, and then some of the other ones are the more famous ones, the Tic Tac and the different still shots from videos that have been released by our government that they have known about for a long time. So the Tic Tac, a lot of you have heard about the Tic Tac. That's probably the most famous, November 14th of 2004. We were about 100 miles southeast of San Diego. Uh, uh, Super Hornet fighter commander David Fravor was was a pilot, a Navy pilot that was off of the USS Nimitz, and they were actually in the area, the, conducting drills for deployment in the Persian Gulf, and they had been doing this for at least a couple of weeks with the USS Princeton. So for about 2 weeks now, they had seen these objects, something in the sky, something being picked up on radar, something above them as they were training. And in this one particular day, when David Fravor was up at altitude and saw these, they decided to take a chase at them. There were what they don't tell you in the video, they cut the video shy, but there was about a dozen of them up there. One came down lower, he went up higher to get a better look at it, and that's this one here that you see in the picture, it went down in the ocean. There was a swirling underwater. He followed it along, and that was really that. This was released in 2017 by Corbell, but the government didn't officially come out till a couple years later. So this was, I thought, the beginning of Tic Tacs. Well, it actually wasn't. Zechariah 5, verse 1, 2, from my King James version of the Bible, I found this passage. Then I turned and lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a flying roll. And he said unto me, What seest thou? And I answered, I see a flying roll, the length thereof is 20 cubits, and the beneath thereof 10 cubits. That is what sounds like a tic tac back in biblical time, 15 by 30 feet, 15 foot in the diameter, 30 feet long. Now, that's not the only tic tac. I found this too. This is former gunner mate John Bowman. He served on the USS Carl Vinson from 2008 to 13. He also in 2010 saw a tic tac. He said, I was staring in the water from above, and a large flat white tic tac object, approximately 20 feet in length, suddenly appeared in my view below me, moving right and darted into the depths as fast as it appeared.
You there, Debbie? You froze up.
It's not a good internet connection.
This is high speed, and she's got high speed. And give her a call. Oh, great. She'll come back in. It's never happened before. Yeah, I see that. Is that on your end or our end? I'll just try to come back in. No, but you were using it. It shouldn't have.
Without technical problems.
Okay, I'm admitting you. There you are. And you'll have to share your screen again.
I'm unmuting. And okay, let me see if I'm gonna have to see if the presentation is up. Okay, meeting is being recorded.
Nope. Yeah, you'll have to share screen again.
Right, I have to bring my pets. Okay, let me see how far back here. Well, it doesn't want to. There we go. Can we go back? Okay, there's where I should be. Okay, you see me now?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay, we move this here out of the way. Okay. So now we go on to with the breakup of the Soviet Union back in the early 1990s, a lot of their secret information was obtained by several Russian writers, several Russian ufologists. A lot of information came out, and luckily, we were able to find out things that had been hidden for a long time. This is one in particular. This was in the Anapa area on the Black Seas in the 1960s. Lieutenant Commander Olev Sokolov was publicly spoke of unidentified fast-moving submarine encounters. He said they were picked up by sonar, traveling faster than anything that had been seen before. They finally decided to bring technicians on board, and maybe they could figure out what was going on. These things were being picked up as sonar targets numerous times, faster than any known vessel, performing unmatchable maneuvers, and then just escaping with ease. Finally, it was just decided by the brass that they were just going to go ahead and log it and stow it because they weren't figuring out what it was. Even technicians couldn't figure out what was moving around underwater, which is a little scary. Another unidentified submarine encounter that was reported by British Naval Intelligence Officer Ivan Sanderson. He said that the Navy was conducting exercises off of the coast of Puerto Rico. They were training in detection and tracking of submarines. They had 5 surface ships involved, including the command ship, the USS Wasp, and several submarines and aircraft. The sonar operator on one of the destroyers reported that a submarine had broke formation. A U.S. submarine broke formation in pursuit, high speed underwater, of an object that was going more than 173 miles an hour underwater, 4 times faster than any speed underwater in 1963. They tracked this for 4 days, reached a depth of 27,000 feet. And 13 separate reports were noted in official logs and reported to Complant, which is the commander for the Atlantic Fleet ships in Norfolk, Virginia. There were also sounds underwater that were detected by the Soviets. Soviet nuclear power submarines reported these sounds that were transmitting very, very deep and low. They were nicknamed Vakuri, which is Vakat is translated from Russian to mean croak. So these sounds were coming from deep underwater, sounding like croaking frogs. Sometimes the sounds would get closer, sometimes far away, sometimes faster and slower, sometimes just complete repetition. So they decided, well, they're going to try and follow these, try and detect them. They'd go down deeper, the sounds would go deeper. Then they would come up higher, the sounds would come up higher. It was almost like they were trying to communicate with these strange sounds, but they really couldn't figure out what it was that was going on. They'd even change the signals, the frequency. So when they would leave the area, there wouldn't be any sound and they'd go back into the area. This happened, and they would hear these sounds again. So this happened all through the 1960s and the 1970s. And a lot of it was Soviet ice-breaking vessels that were hearing this. Let's see if I can minimize this. Okay, whoops. No, I can't. I'm hiding the top here. That's okay. This was also, sorry, I can't see my screen. Okay. They were also seen, geez, sorry. Maybe if I minimize this. Nope, sorry. I can't see the top of my screen. View, speaker view.
Yeah, we can see it, Debbie.
Gallery. Okay. Well, now I've lost my presentation here.
We can see it.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, I got rid of it. They had a big band across. I couldn't see it in my titles. Okay. This was Puffin Islands in Wales in the early 1974. There were so many lights that were seen coming in and out of the area. Ufologist Phil Hoyle believed that the area had some type of an underwater alien base, that they saw these solid objects reported by numerous people. And even the witnesses, when he started interviewing, said that they thought they were being taken underwater and being abducted and had medical procedures done on them by human-looking aliens. They were told that they were at an underwater alien base. Catalina Island on June 14th of 1992 had so many sightings. Now, the picture here is from another sighting off of Catalina Island, and that was taken in 1966. But there were over 200 reported UFO sightings. And I thought at first, okay, 200 different people reported. No, over 200 sightings by witnesses of things that were hovering over and around the area of Catalina Island in California, which is just off of Malibu. There were so many of them that I thought, okay, well, I wonder if what was going on in Malibu, just across basically 48 miles northeast of Catalina. And they also had sightings there. There were many witnesses that reported these things were hovering, no sound at all, then accelerating out of the area at a high rate of speed. So a lot of these people reported to the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard refused to acknowledge it even happened. And I'm sure they investigated it, but they wouldn't give out any information at all, like it never happened. Mark D'Antonio, a good friend of mine, also had an encounter underwater. Mark has been with MUFON since 1971. You might have seen Mark on some of the shows on Travel Channel and History Channel. He's one of the people that's their expert in photo video analyst on a lot of their specials. And he said back in 1994, he was at sea on a nuclear submarine working on a classified government project with them. He would make models. That's pretty much what he did. He's the owner of FX Models. And he said that he happened to be down in Sonar because he had unfortunately eaten a very greasy meal the night before they left port and got seasick. And the best place when you're seasick, apparently on a submarine, is to go down to sonar. So he was down talking to the sonar operator, and this very fast object moved by across the sonar screen. And he said, "What was that?" Well, the sonar operator called the XO, and he said, "Sir, we have another one of those fast movers that just went across the screen." And he said, "You know what to do, log it, stow it, move on." And Mark said, "Well, can I investigate it? You know, I'm a UFO investigator." And the XO said to him, he said, "Mark, are you enjoying being on our boat?" And he said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "You want to stay?" Mark never said a word about it again until a few months later, and he happened to be at a formal dinner, and there was an admiral there. And he said, "Admiral, can you tell me anything about these fast movers and our submarines?" Is it, he said, "some type of fast mover project?" And he said, "Now, Mark, you know, I can't tell you anything about that." We were happened to be, I happened to be, my husband and I, on a MUFON cruise on March 21st of 2019. This is I was speaking on the cruise about water, naturally, and this is our tour guide, Felipe. It was funny, he took us to, he was taking us in Cozumel to all the different water sites, kind of echo sites, ruins, that type of thing. And we all had these t-shirts on. Naturally, it's March, and so you have this, you know, the summer solstice, and he was looking at all of us saying, "Why are you wearing alien shirts and UFO shirts?" And so one of the other people there told him, "I'm busy taking pictures." And then we all said, "Well, wait a minute." Everybody started asking him, "Have you ever had a sighting?" And he said, "Well, about 20 years ago, he was in this little area." And he started pointing, and I said, "Right here?" And he said, "Yes." And that's where it was, that little kind of like an island right off of where we were. He said that he was doing a tour for some people, and this silver metallic object about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, one of the old ones, small, roundish, no markings or anything, completely just shiny silver, came up out of the water. So he said he got scared, he left, he's headed for home, and as he's going along the road that runs alongside the ocean, there's mango trees, and then there's open area, and back and forth, he could see this thing following him. Then finally he made a right-hand turn inland and lost it. And he said it scared him so badly. He said he was shaking when he got to his driveway. And his cousin, who also worked there at the time, pulled up, and he said, "Did you see that following you?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And I said, "Well, did you ever see anything else?" And he said, "No, he hadn't. But if you live in the Cozumel area, it's not unusual. He said, especially if you're a commercial fisherman, to see things. He said they see things underwater all the time that are green, kind of glowing underwater, things that are hovering above the water, and then all of a sudden they just dive down into the water or they're coming out. He said there's stories about this and tales about it. And he said the old fishermen sit around and, in the morning and talk about these things over coffee. So, okay, we know that there's bases and, that I just touched on a few of them, but there's something going on underwater. There's reasons why craft are coming from the skies into the water, hovering over the water, coming out of the water. What's going on under the water? Well, I thought, are there creatures under the water? There's obviously some kind of a base. Now, this picture I found, and this was taken supposedly by a underwater research submarine. They released it, then they tried to backtrack from it. I tried to find anything that could really substantiate its authenticity. But I thought, for at least I'm going to use it, because this is a lot of what's being described by people that have seen creatures underwater. And I thought, I tend to believe this was something real, and this research vessel just doesn't want to have anything to do with this. On November 23rd of 1977, there was a report to Leonard Stringfield, and this is something that was reported to him that had happened about 2 years prior. Leonard Stringfield was a researcher back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, mostly in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. He had some great books out. He was the person to report sightings to. Well, on this date, these two, and I'm kind of believing it was a well-known scuba diver, but there were a couple scuba divers that were on a yacht that used to belong to President Truman. One of them, like I said, the well-known one, went to Stringfield to report this. He was diving with an anthropologist. And I was starting to think, well, okay, 1977, could that be Jacques Cousteau? I don't know. It wasn't said in there, but it seems to me like he was one of the most well-known divers, except for Lloyd Bridges and Sea Hunt. Um, but so this was off the coast of Florida, underwater, and while these two divers were down, and they said not really all that deep, they came across a 7-foot tall alien sitting on a rock. They went a little bit deeper to get a better look and thought, what are we seeing? They said it had unusual ears, eyes, mouth, legs, arms. And as they got closer, this thing looked at them and started to go deeper. It turned around and over its shoulder, gave them one last look, and then disappeared into the depths. Lake Baikal, this is one of the most interesting stories. 1982. There were a group of 7 military divers, which are probably the equivalent of our Navy SEALs. They were diving at about 165 feet. They were training in Lake Baikal. I'm sure they were training with different gases. They definitely had flashlights. At 165 feet, it's pretty dark, especially in a lake. So these divers are 7 military divers down there training 165 feet with flashlights, moving them back and forth and looking and wondering, okay, whatever they were doing, that they were training, shine these flashlights, and they come across these 4 humanoid creatures that are 10 foot tall, hovering right in front of them. There were 4 of them, 3 to the back, 1 to the front, which almost seemed like their leader. They were all dressed in some kind of a silvery suit, no tank, no BCD, no dive gear, regulator, that type of thing, but they were wearing helmets. They had some kind of a big helmet with a mouthpiece in front. And I guess that was the breathing device. It would seem to me they were almost like what we call a rebreather. So they didn't need a tank. They were kind of regenerating their air. So they looked at these creatures, and the first thing they did was exactly what I probably would have done at 165 feet. They slowly backed up and they made their way to the surface. Now imagine that you've just seen these 4 10-foot tall creatures in the dark waters below you. And at 165 feet, you don't go to the surface immediately. Depending on how long they were down there, it may have been at least an hour coming up level by level, like by level, ascending little by little to decompress so they wouldn't get decompression sickness. At a minimum, I would say it was probably an hour before they could come up. And probably last 15 feet was probably at least another 10 minutes knowing what was under there. Well, they decided that they were, oops, let me go back one. I'm sorry, hit it by accident. They decided that they should, of course, report this. And they reported it to their officials, and the commanders, after a meeting, decided they were going to go to the exact same spot and they were going to capture one of these aliens. So they sent these guys down, same ones again, sent them down 165 feet in the same area with a net. Now they're going to take this net and they're going to throw it over one of these 10-foot tall beings. I'm not exactly sure how they were going to get it to the surface. I don't know if they pre-thought that. That really wasn't in the report. But if you're going to throw a net over a being and then try and get it to the surface little by little by little, or were they just going to put an airbag on it, a lift bag, and then just fill it with air and just take this thing to the surface immediately and kill it? But whichever they decided, 2 of the divers out of the 7 took a net, went forward. There they were. They found these 4 beings again, 1 in the front, 3 behind, tried to throw the net over the one in front. And as they flung this net, it backed up, put its arms straight out. All 7 divers immediately went to the surface. The moment they hit the surface, pretty much 3 of them were dead when they hit the surface. The other 4, and when you go to the surface that quick, best way to describe it is your blood just literally boils. So they took the other 4 divers, took them to decompression chambers. They had 2, only 1 worked. Put all 4 divers in the other decompression chamber. 1 survived. There was a meeting about this. There were hearings, and it was decided they weren't going to dive in Lake Baikal anymore. And there was another lake that wasn't too far from there, and they said they weren't going to go on that lake either. And then it was never really discussed again. I started looking at Russian magazines, and it's kind of hard to find because they're not always in English, but this article was published, and there was also an English version, 1994. There was a Russian mission in the Baltic Sea, and this article talked about unidentified, very large humanoid creatures that were being reported. They're seen swimming deep in the Soviet waters and had been for decades. Crews of Soviet submarines had seen these creatures. They described them as human-like swimmers dressed in silver suits, 10 feet tall, swimming at ease at a depth of 1,300 feet. Now, I'm a scuba instructor. My limit is 130 feet. I've been down close, like 148 feet. You can go down with special gases. Like I said, the other ones were down at 165. The Russian divers, 1,300 feet is way too deep for divers unless they come right out of a submarine and go right back in. And, that takes a lot of skill. There's another magazine article. I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name of this magazine, but this was in the Black Sea, Moscow, 1996. Shark hunter B. Borovikov was diving in the Napa area and witnessed several huge creatures heading toward him from the depth. He said these creatures were swimming up to him. They were only about 8 meters away, coming up from below, had fish tails, milky white, humanoid faces. He said one stopped and stared at him and had giant bulging eyes. This is a little book that I found. It was copyrighted and published basically in 1940. George Papashvili. Where Sleep the Giants Still is the chapter that I found this in. And I'd heard the story and I was able to find the book on Amazon. It was incredible. It's just this little book. What it is they were Russians that migrated to the United States to find jobs in the early 1900s, and they eventually made their way in groups. They found each other. They wondered, what in the world did we do that we came to the United States to find jobs on a boat through
Debbie,
Ellis
we
Island.
lost your sound.
My sound?
Can't hear you.
I don't know
Other-
why.
Okay, you're back.
Oh, okay. I didn't do anything here.
Okay.
Okay, so they were Russians that migrated to the United States to find jobs, and then they thought about it. They thought, we don't even know the language. Why would we do this? This was in the early 1900s, but eventually they came through Ellis Island, and eventually a lot of them found each other. They had come together. They found friends, and they used to tell stories. Well, eventually, this gentleman, George, he and his wife bought a farm in Pennsylvania, and as they would had all the friends would come over and help him put on a new roof and siding and everything. In the evening time, they'd feed him and they'd tell stories. And he said, I've got a great story. He said, back when he was 11, 12 years old, he and three of his friends, and one of the friends brought his little bear named Mishka, decided they were going to go swimming south of let's see, Kakheti? Well, it's a little Russian town. My Russian is a little rusty. They hiked to the Turkey River where it came into a small lake, and they were able to swim in this area because there had been a drought and the water was way down. They dove off of this ledge and into a big hole, and that was just underneath the cliff there. And George said he went in first and he dove down and he looked around and he thought, oh, how funny. I think I'm going to stay down here a while. He saw a cave and he stayed down there a while. And then he came up and he told the other boys, he said, you're not going to believe what I saw down there. There's giant bones. And the other boys didn't believe him, so they all went down. Well, they go down in this cave. It's a very large opening in a cave. There weren't there was no treasure, there was nothing. And the reason where sleep the giants still is because just a lot of giant bones were down there. They said they were huge. The boys, and this was only accessible because the water was down so much and they hadn't really swam there before. But they said they had round human heads the size of bushel baskets, a bulge over their forehead. They said the eye holes, your fist could go through it. Straight, even teeth, leg bones as tall as the boys, 5-finger hands, long, long legs. They said alive they would have had better than a 6-foot stride. The one of the boys named Tito took the last pinky finger, little bone, took a bone home with him. But he was telling the story of this, and he said that really he never told the story before. That he said three of the other boys, let's see, two of the other boys had passed away, but he thought Tito was still, or Teto was still alive, and he still had that pinky bone finger. I had a chance a few years ago to speak to Jorge Martin from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a very, very active area, of course, because it's an island for water sightings. And he said there are craft that are coming in and out of wormholes right above the island. He said that he's been investigating the waters around the area, trying to looking at NOAA and finding topography. And he seriously thinks there's underwater bases there. This is part of what he gave me off of his website. That's why it's in Spanish. He says, did we discover a large undersea alien base in the southeast of Puerto Rico? And you can see right here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the first picture here under what I just read, there's something there. Ponce is just right here, and there's something, substructure underwater. Also, the picture at the top, there's some kind of structure here. This one, right after he posted it on his website, that disappeared and it got blurred out. The other one, I went on the website and actually I'd already found that on the website, but on this one picture with the little small opening, it's got bigger one. I've got an opening there at the bottom. That's the wormhole. And if you see just before it hit the water, that's a craft that had come out of that and went into the water. Creatures. I've heard stories and stories about creatures in Puerto Rico. This is one from 1980. This young boy, Jose Zayas, was at the National Guard camp, which it's basically campgrounds, national forest. And he went into a cave area that's part of the area that you can go exploring. And he said, as he got walking through this cave, something grabbed his leg. He said, scared him to death. He said he saw this little creature holding onto his leg. He picked up a stick he found in the cave and just started beating it, and he killed it. Well, then he started to feel bad. He noticed it was this little humanoid looking creature. So he thought, I better take it to the police station. So he took it to police officer Oswald Santiago. Santiago gave it to Guido Morales, who was the owner of the local funeral home. The Morales put it in a jar from formaldehyde to, I guess, to keep it preserved. But he described it as having, and this is an actual picture of it that they took before it disappeared, of course. But he placed it in this jar. It had white blondish hair on the sides of its head, large transparent eyes with purple-like, they were purple-like cat pupils, like pupils like a cat, very long, thin arms, hands that reached its knees, 4 clawed web fingers, and feet like flippers. He said it didn't bleed. He said, but it had this goo instead of blood, where it was injured. It had male-looking genitals, but he said it was definitely not a baby or a monkey. And he said then after they talked about it a while, men from NASA showed up and confiscated it. This is Lake Laguna Cartagena. This is in the southwestern portion of Puerto Rico, and there are a lot of sightings. There are a lot of strange things that go on, craft coming in and out. But there's also there's people that talk about this lake that they wouldn't go anywhere near it because they also think it's very, very polluted. These are just a few of the sightings. 1964, Schra and Quinn Ramirez saw 2 7-foot-tall white men with long blonde hair, silvery tight-fitting suits. On August 31st of 1990, Miguel Figueroa and many others saw 5 creatures walking down the road. They said they were skinny, grayish, pear-shaped heads, slits for mouths, long arms, 3 fingers and 3 toes. He said he followed them in his car, and the creatures emitted a bright light like a welding torch with their eyes straight at him. There were similar creatures that reported in the Caribbean National Forest. In February of 1991, police officer Luis Torres and his wife and 2 other police officers and their wives saw 2 creatures that were walking down Route 191. They were 4 foot tall, greenish gray skin suits with a hood, arms to their knees, large elongated heads, large dark eyes. Torres said that he drew his gun for protection and the creatures ran away. August 13th, 1991, Schra Camacho saw the same creatures taking her plants from the front of her house. She had little planters in her house, and these creatures were pulling them out and running off with them. In 1991, Ulysses Perez also saw these same creatures near an irrigation canal. Chupacabra, I've seen a lot of reports of chupacabra mostly in Puerto Rico, but also in Brazil has a lot of these. The first one I could find reported was in 1995, but the general consensus is 3 or 4 clawed fingers on their hands, 2 elongated red eyes, small nostrils, fanged teeth, long tongue, coarse black hair, chameleon. They said some of them can turn brown, green, gray, light brown, beige. They also, some of them, people report that they fly. They feed on animals by mutilation, and Jorge Martin said that they have been captured and studied by the U.S. government. This is an article that I found in one of their newspapers about these. Okay, so now we know that there's creatures in and around island areas and are underwater that are definitely not humanoid, but they may be residents, and at least the ones in Russia, in the depths, these 10-foot-tall creatures seem to be residents of the Baltic, Lake Baikal, and other water areas surrounding Russia. So I thought, what a great place to hide. They've hidden for years. What about abductees? I wonder if any abductees have been remember being taken underwater. The problem I had trying to figure that out is that when you get a report from about abductees, they sometimes remember being brought back. Maybe their memory, they get consciousness before they wake up, or maybe most of them, I believe, remember being taken. They see something else and they have missing time and they don't know what happened. Sometimes they remember being brought back in just strange circumstances. And through regression therapy, they remember what happened to them. But for whatever reason, most of them don't remember the trip there and the trip back. And I thought if you're going to take somebody to a place and you don't want them to know where you took them, you want to keep the place a secret, you make sure that's the most important thing to erase from their memory is the trip there and back, so they can't make their way back there or tell anybody where it is. Good way to hide. So I started looking at sightings and I was able to find about a dozen of them. This was a fisherman, Orlando Jorge Ferrati. He was 18 years old and he was taken in 1956. He was fishing near Buenos Aires and he was approached by a 7-foot tall humanoid with white skin, light colored eyes, short hair that wore a tight-fitting yellow hooded overall. He was mentally told not to be afraid. And he said this alien had this small box, and when he opened it up, it lit up the whole area, kind of like a massive, bright flashlight. And when it did, when it lit up the area, he saw this craft that was approaching from the water. He said it looked like an inverted saucer. The door opened and a ramp came down, and he was led inside by these creatures. He saw a girl in there. Now he was 18. He said she looked like she was 5 or 6 years younger than him, and she told him that her name was Elena and that she was from San Luis. Well, the aliens told him that their clothes were contaminated and they'd have to change clothes. So Elena was led off by what they kind of assumed was a female alien, and he was kept there and basically led to a room that was real close. And both of them had to give up their clothes. They said their clothes were taken and put in a machine that looked like a TV filled with green smoke. Now, if you think about it, 1956, the TVs were kind of like in this console with these little tiny screens on them. And, so that's why the description looked like a TV filled with green smoke. But if you think about our upright washer and dryers now, that sounds like a really good description of one of those. But they took their clothes and they gave them overalls, and they said it was kind of the same thing that the aliens were wearing, and they were given those until their clothes were cleaned, which apparently were given back to them when they were eventually released. Well, the two of them took a trip underwater. They emerged at a low altitude right off the coast of Uruguay, and then they went back underwater. They crossed the Atlantic to Africa and then came up again. The two of them said, why do we keep going underwater and coming back up and underwater and coming back up? And the alien said that they try and stay underwater as much as they can and stay hidden because they don't want to seem like invaders. So the beings told them that they came from inside the earth, that in 1950 they had built 2 underwater bases and these 2 were taken to a base that was in the Gulf of Mexico. They also traveled to a subaquatic dome that looked like an Eskimo igloo, and they were told that that's the place where the aliens used that to recondition their ships. Linda Porter's a very famous abductee. She remembers she wrote a book and remembers at the age of 15 that she was taken underwater to a base in the ocean off the coast of California near Santa Barbara. This is a picture here that she drew, the large alien behind her as a little girl, and she's staring into this light. But she said the base that she was taken to was 2 to 3 story tall, like a building. And she was told that, now this is off of California, Santa Barbara, north of Catalina Island, that the base had some kind of camouflage electronic net. So fish, people, nobody could see. They were hidden with this electronic net camouflaged. that the being there, she said, Prey Manus was standing there, leading her to a very bright, light-filled room, talking to her mentally. And it didn't say anything at first because it knew that she was really afraid. But when it eventually talked to her, she said she really could remember what it had told her. There were numerous encounters that she remembered throughout her teens and her 20s. And in February 28th of 1991, she finally decided she needed to do something about this and reached out to Linda Moulton Howe. She sent her a package that had an audio cassette, a letter, and some drawings, and Linda got her help through regression therapy. She remembered numerous encounters in this regression, being motion sickness during a transport through an interdimensional tunnel, and what was called a soul transfer. Now, apparently, she had a diseased heart, and somewhere along the way, they had cloned her body and they had it in a transparent tube. So when they took her in this particular time, they told her they were doing a soul transfer, and they transferred her soul to this cloned body that was in this tube, and her diseased body with the bad heart, I guess, she was out of that and in the new body. They told her this was called resurrection technology. Betty Andreessen was very interesting encounters that this woman had. One of the most interesting was that she was working in her kitchen. This was on January 25th of 1967. She lives in South Ashburnham. Um, let's see, would be Massachusetts, MA. She was in the kitchen. She's got 7 children. Their ages at the time were between 3 and 11 years old. Her mother, her father, they were all in the living room. She was working in the kitchen making dinner. Her mom was in there helping her out a little bit too. And at 6:30 at night, she said all the lights in the house started blinking. They were just blinking on and off and on and off. And then a red light beamed in through the kitchen window. She said then the house went dark. So she ran to the kids, to the 7 young children, to comfort them. And her father ran to the kitchen to look out the window to see where this light was coming from and why all their other lights are out. They saw 5 beings that were coming toward the house in a hopping motion. They locked all the doors, but these beings walked right through the front door, which was wooden, just right through it like it wasn't there. The entire family, she watched them as they put them in some type of a state of suspended animation. They weren't moving, they were just frozen. Then the aliens took her outside to a waiting craft that was, she said, about 20 foot in diameter, classic saucer shape. And that craft took off and it joined another larger craft. So she said while they had her, she underwent a physical examination, and then they returned her home 4 hours later, and everybody was still in the suspended animation. And there was one alien that was there with them, and she said, why did you leave this alien? And it was basically, he said he wanted to make sure that they were okay. He wanted to watch over the family while she was gone. Well, about 8 years later, she answered an ad from Jale and Hynek for regression, people that had experiences that wanted to have regression, which she did. And eventually he published these results along with other people's results in a 528-page account. Some of the things that she remembered, these are some of the pictures that she drew that I got them from her book, of some of her encounters and what some of the beings look like, her experiences. But she remembered under regression that there was a gray leader on one of these encounters that was 5 foot tall. The other beings were more 4 foot tall. They had pear-shaped heads, wide eyes, small ears and nose, slit for mouth, wore blue overalls with a wide belt and boots, a logo of a bird on their sleeves. Their hands had 3 fingers, and she said the creatures didn't walk, they just floated. She also remembered going back, now the other encounter was 1967, going back, as a child, in fall of 1945, she saw a circular object land, felt paralyzed, found herself in a white room with 3 small beings. She said the aliens placed light globes all around her that were just floating all around. They were flashing and they were spinning. She said then the craft that she was in, she noticed that it plunged into the water. She said she could see out the windows. And she said this craft that they put her in plunged into the water and then rose above it. And then she realized that when it rose back up, she was in an icy cave. It makes me wonder if they're in Antarctica. Another occasion she remembered was she saw a glass dome above her. She was in a flying object that plunged into the water somewhere off of the US coastline. And a direct quote from her book was, Betty said, "It's going so fast. Oh, it feels like I'm staying still. I'm tilted a little. Oh, there's water coming up. Oh." Well, she realized that she was in some type of a tube. There was water rolling around and around her. And then she realized that she was fine. She wasn't going to drown. And in this tube, and in that she was taken she was in a larger vehicle, and she was taken to a large aquatic base. She said the base was what they called a museum of life. And in this base, she said there were examples in these glass containers of humans from different eras in history, just dressed in different clothes. Going back ancient beings, earthlings as well, from different eras in history, almost like a museum. This one I thought was very, very interesting. This pilot, Captain William Schaffner, was off the coast of East Yorkshire on the British coast. He was sent up to chase down an unidentified object that had showed up on radar. He was in a Foxtrot 94 Royal Air Force Lightning fighter jet. So he scrambled to intercept what was unknown, what they thought to be a UFO. Well, they were going back and forth and back and forth. They really didn't report whether or not he was shooting at it, but they were basically in a dogfight back and forth, a chase. Him chasing it chasing him. But it ended up right off Flamborough Head. He ended up crashing into the North Sea. The interesting part about this was that they looked and looked and looked for him. He just left radar, crashed into the sea. Crashed. They saw on radar him going down. 3 months later, they were finally able to recover his jet. They found him on the seabed. The plane was virtually undamaged. Now, this plane crashed into the sea, didn't have a dent, scratch, or anything. If you've ever seen a plane on the news, on anything, crashing into the water, it breaks up into pieces. It's like hitting concrete. Not only was it not damaged at all, the cockpit canopy was still shut, and he wasn't in there. So now, how in the world did this end up sitting on the ocean floor with the cockpit canopy shut, undamaged, and him gone? So they had basically labeled this as an abduction in September of 1970. This is another one I found about a pilot in 1972 in Puerto Rico. The report was it started out, the report in 1972, but actually the sighting started in 1971 with David DeMundo. He was a commercial air pilot for a Puerto Rican airline, and he saw a whole bunch of greenish blue lens-shaped luminous objects that were close to his flight, just flying, swarming around the plane. Well, when he landed, he reported this not only to air traffic control, but to the airline that he worked for, and unfortunately, the local newspaper that interviewed him. Well, when all this came out, the airline fired him. So in 1972 is when this incident happened. He was just standing in his house, turned around, and right next to him was this human-like creature. He said, I don't know how he arrived. He was just there. The creature was 5'3", thin lips, nub nose, green wide, wrap around oval eyes. It had a one-piece gray uniform with a U emblem on it. It was wearing a turban, and it had stars on the turban that were 10 to 12 points on the stars. And this was in the front of its turban. So he said this creature took him to a 30 foot in diameter craft. When he went in, the interior was lit in green. There were 4 chairs and a control panel. DeMondo said that the aliens told him they had come from someplace near Orion. Well, then he noticed his craft is moving. He was kind of looking at the controls and he could see that he submerged and he was 35 miles away now to the southwest. And then they descended down 9,000 feet. He said matter was displaced and they entered a dry cave with 25 other craft. So this thing went underwater and someplace under there, they have a base. And that's another way to hide it. Matter was displaced. Opened it up, 25 other craft, and then closed in behind them so no one else can see. He said he was fed some kind of a strange meal and told that 83 other contactees were also there, just like him, other humanoids. 6 additional underwater camps, he said, were being built through 1976. So this is 1972. They intended to have at least 6 camps built by 1976 underwater. He said the aliens changed out every 6 months. And I've had this report for years and years. I didn't realize until these astronauts got stuck on the International Space Station, and Elon Musk went and sent a craft and had them brought home, and they were worried because they had been up there well over 6 months. And I thought, how odd is that it's unsafe, it's dangerous, really, to have our astronauts over there, although they did say that they felt fine, is what we were told, but they don't like them in space more than 6 months. They change them out. And here the aliens changed out their crew every 6 months. So he asked him, he said, well, why Puerto Rico? And they said, well, Puerto Rico is highly magnetic. It helps them trap energy that they need to leave the atmosphere. This one's very famous, Pascagoula River in Mississippi. These two, Charles Hickman, 42 years old at the time, and Calvin Parker, and they're pictured here. And this was all over newspapers, and there's still books about it. And in fact, I get an email once a month with updates about the Pascagoula River and more reports that they have found, more evidence. But these two were fishing after work. They were taken by this craft. This blue light showed up from behind them, and this large ball-shaped object came in, hovered low. They said it was about 30 foot long, 8 to 10 foot high, football shaped, dome on the top. Door opened up and these aliens came out, these beings came out, grabbed them from underneath their arms and floated them back into this craft. They said the beings were humanoid, no neck, pointed 2-inch, long nose, slit for a mouth, long arms, hands resembled mittens with a thumb. Their legs remained together. They had elephant feet, grayish wrinkled body, eyes blocked by skin that kind of hung over. The men were taken each to different places, as different rooms. As they were taking them, they said that Calvin Parker, Hickman said Calvin Parker was just screaming bloody murder, and then he passed out. The older one, of course, Charles Hickman, he said he could pretty well remember what they were doing. And he said they did some experiments on both of them. And as they did stuff, he said they were doing some kind of medical procedures. And as they did this, they both lay there paralyzed. And then when they got done, they just put them back on the pier. Well, Maria and Jerry Blair were on the other side of the river, and when this happened, Maria Blair says that she was putting clothes in the boat. They were going to go fishing, and she saw a blue-green light in the sky, and as if it was searching. And then she heard a splash and looked, and there was this humanoid creature that came up from underwater right next to the pier, right next to her. She said it was grayish, wearing a skin diver, what looked like a skin diver suit, but it didn't have any diving gear. And then it just submerged and never came back up. Well, her husband, Jerry, said, no, that's not what happened. He said there were 2 creatures that were 6 foot tall, gray, at the end of the pier. They grabbed him and floated him to the spaceship. And he said Maria was floated by a 5 foot tall creature as well to the spaceship. Exams were done on both of them, and they were, just like the other 2 gentlemen, taken back to the pier near their boat. They watched the creatures float away to the other side of the Pascagoula River toward the spacecraft, and then it left all of them and shot off into the sky. Well, in Plains, I found this in the Plainsville Telegraph, November 8th of 1973. There was more sightings in the Pascagoula River. Raymond Ryan, age 42, said he was fishing and underwater he see this light and it was moving around underwater. He go, well, what's this? So he starts beating it with his oar, and every time he beat on the water, it would make it dimmer. So then he went back to shore and got his brother Ramey. They both went back out there and they're poking at this thing. And this light underwater, this small round light underwater, is just moving around underwater, circling their boat. So they thought, okay, this is crazy. So they contacted the Coast Guard. And at 9:40 p.m., the Coast Guard dispatched a 16-foot boat. The object was located in 4 to 6 foot of water, moving 4 to 6 knots. Well, the exact Coast Guard description was amber beam, 4 to 6 inch in diameter, attached to bright metal object. They said they tried to retrieve it, it'd go out, move away, and then it'd reappear. It traveled several different courses within an hour, and it was referred to by the Coast Guard as an unidentified submerged illuminating object. They forwarded this report to Washington, D.C. This is another pilot, Fred Valench. This happened on Saturday, October 21st, 1978. This 20-year-old pilot was training out southeast of our Australia, and he had a small 125, he was 125 nautical miles away, training in a small lightweight Cessna plane over Bass Strait going to King Island. He radioed Melbourne that there was some kind of an object in the sky. He said about 1,000 feet above him. He said his plane was the whole plane was just vibrating and shaking so hard he thought the plane was going to break up, and he was panicking, telling him the plane was running rough. So they asked, he said, is there anything on radar? Is there anything on radar? They're looking, they couldn't pick anything up, but he said, it's a long shaped object coming for me right now. It's hovering on top of me. It's not an airplane. And then he just vanished. He was gone. That was it. They never did see the craft. They could see him. They couldn't see what this craft was. The last sound that they heard, what they said, was a chilling, screeching metal on metal. The whole region was searched and he was never found. Never him, never his plane. But they had witnesses that were reporting in the region at the same time that they'd seen some kind of a strange object, and they were reporting to the radio station there. They believe that there's an alien base in the Bass Strait because they said there's a lot of activity of things coming in and out of the water. This was a very strange story. Filberto Cardenas. On January 3rd of 1979, Filberto decided he wanted, that weekend, he wanted to barbecue a pig. He wanted to have a big pig roast. So his car wasn't big enough, and so he contacted his friend Fernando Marty, who owned a shop, and went over there and said, hey, can I use your car? Can you take me over? I want to go to some farms on the outskirts of town, see if I can get a pig. Well, this was right after Christmas, and so they were having a lot of trouble finding a pig, and they never did because all the pig farms were sold out because of Christmas and New Year. But Fernando had also brought along his wife, Myrta, and Isabel. They were in the back seat of the car. So they're coming back from this, and they're driving down a road kind of off the beaten path because they were trying to find these pig farms, when all of a sudden the engine just stopped. So there's a picture here. They did a reenactment on how they were when all of this went down. They said that the engine just quit. Then they saw this reflection of red and violet lights in a sequence and heard a strange sound, kind of like bees swarming. The whole car then started shaking. So Myrta jumped on top of Isabel in the back seat, trying to hide her. They said both men became paralyzed, and then Fernando watched Filberto be lifted into the sky. So he's paralyzed, and he said, I stuck my head underneath the hood of the car. The other two were in the back hiding, and Filberto just hovered for a bit. He said, went up in the sky, kind of hovered, and then went right into this strange craft, and then just moved away, was gone. Well, it ended up that Filberto was, of course, on a UFO. He woke up on this, wondering what in the world happened. And as he kind of looked around and wondered, "Oh, okay, now, and I'm dead, basically." I mean, poor man was scared to death. But they calmed him down and said, "We're not going to hurt you." They took him and showed him an underwater base near Miami. Then he said he saw three strange figures. They came toward him and they took him to a smaller ship. And then when they did that, they put him in this ship, and then he looked out and he could see a beach approaching. And he realized that somehow mentally he was told that they were plunging into the Pacific Ocean. Well, they were in the Atlantic before, now they're in the Pacific. And he said, looking underwater, he could see a tunnel which the ship entered. So their ship entered this underwater tunnel, emerged in a place that was once again completely dry. He was welcomed by a humanoid looking figure that said he was from Earth and he'd worked with the beings for a long time. He was also taken to another trip. I mean, they basically gave him a tour to an undersea alien city and then returned to a pasture 10 miles from where he was taken. So he was returned on the side of the road to this pasture, and he remembers waking up and he's disoriented. He walks right out in front of this car. The car stops and he's disoriented, walking around. The gentleman tried to put him in the car. Now, this is 1979. There's no cell phones. And Fierberto wouldn't get in the car. And so the Good Samaritan put him in the median. So then the Good Samaritan drove to the police station and said, "Hey, I found this guy. There's something wrong with him. He's in the median." Well, the police knew that he was missing. So they went to the median. They found him. They took him back to the police station and called his family. And then also Fernando, Murda, and Isabel were still wondering where he'd been. They were at a different police station. They all met there. And he was interviewed and didn't remember a lot of what happened. And then eventually he ended up in the hospital. A lot of you have heard about the Gulf Breeze too. This craft here, it probably looks very familiar. I feel kind of sorry for Ed Waters. I understand that he saw this craft, Gulf Breeze. He built a model in his garage and they thought he was faking this, but it was kind of like Close Encounters where he was making Devil's Tower. The main star was making out of mashed potatoes, trying to make Devil's Tower models. Everything he did, he was trying to just in his mind place what he had seen. Well, Ed Waters was building that to kind of do the same thing. He was just obsessed with this, and then people later thought that his pictures were faked. So these pictures were analyzed by Bruce Maccabee, who authenticated them. But what I didn't know that Bud Hopkins had also examined him because he was having reoccurring dreams. So Ed Waters remembers dreaming about rising high in the sky over the coastline and then a quick descent and then passing underneath the water. And he says he remembers he gasped for air in fear of drowning. And then as he went deeper, he realized he was in some kind of a glass container. He could see water and fish from a diamond-shaped window and numerous bubbles passing by the window, and then followed by raising sand, which covered the glass. This one here, interesting, Linda Cortell. Her name was Linda Napolitano, but her alias, Linda Cortell, if you've ever read the book, witnessed November 30th of 1989, she was in her bed 12 stories up in a Manhattan apartment building, and she woke with her husband sleeping next to her, woke up and there was a figure standing next to her bed. She was taken and floated out of the window up into the air and entered by three beings, entered the bottom of a craft through the opening in the bottom of this craft, and then made a sharp turn, crashed into the East River near Pier 17. It came to a stop underwater, and she said she could see out through the window and she could see there was trash and stuff floating around. I guess East River at the time was very polluted. She was taken to an examination room with several strange creatures. She described them as gray aliens. She said she was laying on a large examination table with these aliens all around her and they were hurting her. She was fighting and screaming, and she said one of the aliens put its hand over her mouth and kept it there, tried to keep her silent until this procedure they were doing on her was all over with. And then the next thing she remembers, she was back in her bedroom asleep next to her husband, who was still asleep. Well, this was also witnessed, and these pictures came out of her book, out of Bud Hopkins' book, witnessed. She also remembered, or also seeing this incident, were, sorry about it, Richard and Dan. Okay, there were these two bodyguards that were also witnesses to this encounter. Richard and Dan happened to be bodyguards, or claimed at the time they were bodyguards to the United Nations for Secretary General Javier Perez de Solar. They were driving across the bridge, and on November 30th of 1989, when their car just stopped, just absolutely just stopped, both men got out, looked around, and they saw this woman from the bridge, from that building, this woman to 12 stories up, floated out by these three aliens and taken to this ship, this craft that was hovering, and up through the bottom of it. And then they said they watched it descend into the East River right at Pier 17, just like she had claimed. Well, 3 months later, these two, Dan and Richard, contacted Linda Cortell and Bud Hopkins because this obviously became public. So they hunted them down, contacted them, and claimed that they were actually police officers who witnessed it from underneath the bridge. So they were interviewed several times by Bud Hopkins. They wanted to talk more to Linda, and then finally they just had enough. They just decided they were going to take control of this, and in April of 1991 they kidnapped her. They dragged her into the car, and she was walking along the street, interrogated her for several hours, accusing her of being involved somehow with these aliens in this event, and trying to find out if she knew more than what she was saying, or, why her? Well, Bud Hopkins thought, well, they've got to be either men from the CIA or the FBI. Well, he tried to interview him several more times, and if you ever read the, if you've ever read the book, it's crazy. They keep changing their names. They keep changing who they were, who they work for, when they saw her. The whole thing was really confusing. But the fact that they actually witnessed it is really what's pretty amazing. And not only them, but with all this going on and all this being released, this gal came forward, Janet Kimball, and claimed, well, her car also stalled out on the Brooklyn Bridge, that she never said anything. And then after all this became public, she said, well, she watched it happen. She thought they were filming a movie. Another one I found, Anna Jamerson. This is her book from 1995. She had reoccurring dreams over several years throughout high school and college that she was driving a car, the brakes go out, she goes downhill into the water. She had a dream that she was taken from an island beach where she used to visit. She also remembers being terrified of small beings. She remembers being underwater and seeing an ocean liner coming at her bow first, and she was in some kind of a craft below the water, and that she said that the bottom of the ship was black, and then above it was white, and then she saw these colors. She also remembered that she was floating in a long tunnel with soft sides and a green light at the end of it. And when she was in high school, there was a storm coming up, and she was in the beach or in junior high school, I'm sorry, with her. She was on the beach with her mom, and they saw a storm coming, and there was this dense fog coming in. So all the other swimmers got out of the water. They left. For whatever reason, her mom decided that the two of them are going to stay. So here's this young gal and her mom. As the fog gets thicker, they realize they're being taken aboard an alien craft by two grays. One took her mother away into one direction, to another room while they're in this craft, and she was led to another room with a large view screen. She said the screen had a picture. She was either looking underwater or was some type of a TV screen, but she was shown a underwater scene. She was said that you must study the creatures of the water. Now, as a teen, she had fish tanks all over the house. She was awarded first prize in the science fair for collection, and knowledge and management of tropical fish. And at age 14, her father taught her to scuba dive. She also majored in marine biology when she was in college. Katrina Wilson, in her book she published in 1995, remember that September 10th of 1989, off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, she was standing outside and all of a sudden there were four beings right behind her house coming up toward her. Then she remembered being somewhere else in a strange craft. She was given, and this is crazy, a 5 foot tall gray kitten to care for. Now I've heard of 5 foot tall owls, but I'd never heard of a 5 foot tall gray kitten. She said the craft kind of moved away. She looked out the window and she saw snowy mountain range. And then she said the craft landed at a base. She said the aliens took the giant cat and did an examination on it. And then they implanted a memory in her that some type of a memory where there were people abusing baby seals and dolphins. She was told not to eat fish, to eat any other food source. Now, I thought, wow, this sounds really strange, except this book was endorsed by Bud Hopkins, John Carpenter, Donald Ware, Vicki Lyons, and Wendell Stevens. And this is a picture of the craft that she was taken, and some of the craft she was apparently taken several times. This is from her book, Alien Jigsaw. In June of 1992, she was with a friend, Eric. They were parking. They were kind of in the woods, sweethearts. And all of a sudden, they were being abducted by these creatures, these grays that took them aboard a Tic Tac craft. So they're led into this craft, flew over the Pacific Ocean. They said they were flying sideways and upside down. And she said she remembers kicking at the window. So this is inside this Tic Tac. There's a drawing that she did of her inside kicking at the window, trying to get out. They landed on this large object that was in the water. And the inside of the craft, she described it as having 8 cushioned gray seats on each side, 5-foot wide aisle, brown metal floor, a room in the rear of the craft that looked like for storage. In the cockpit in front had a navigator in it, and this thing was 50 to 60 feet long, 12 feet wide. She and Eric were handed a black-eyed baby with large eyes. She remembers being taken back to the car in the woods, and the next morning they both woke up and they had the same memories exactly. Then she said she also remembers that there were either Navy or foreign military that were involved in this abduction. They were also in this craft. So we've got to the conclusion here of how have alien life forms existed on Earth for centuries without being detected? Well, we have very deep ocean trenches for one. These things average about 2.5 miles deep. Trenches are the section in between tectonic plates. And there's extreme pressure at this depth. And you can see here, the one that's horizontal is my son-in-law, Roger. He's equalizing. We're right at 100 feet. These are all divers. I was the one taking the picture, but we were doing a wall dive. And we took down eggs, watched how the eggs were kind of floating around underwater. The Mariana Trench is 7 miles deep. So we have trouble handling 100 feet, as you can see right here. Can you even imagine 7 miles deep? And do we really know what's hidden in the water beneath us? This is me over here to the far right, hovering away, away from this. This is just a little plane that in the 1970s was crashed into the water off Puerto Rico, and it's only 22 feet deep. It was for a movie. They crashed the plane there, and then divers like to go down and basically dive, and it's a good little wreck dive, and it's an easy dive. It's only 22 feet. You can get there right from the shore. This is a cruise ship that I was on. You can get to the top of the cruise ship, look down in the area, just right over here in the water by the ship, and you can't see this at 22 feet. You could be on top of the water looking down and not see this at 22 feet. You see the reflection of the sun. That's how easy it is to hide something underwater. This is a picture that I took. I was on a cruise January 25th of 2006, Royal Caribbean, Explorer of the Seas. I had been diving in St. Martin all day. Then we were headed to St. Thomas. And so I was outside taking pictures of St. Martin because I hadn't seen St. Martin because I was underwater diving all day. So as the ship is leaving port, I'm taking pictures. And then about 20 minutes out, I was heading to the front of the ship to the schooner bar to meet up with the rest of our party. And I looked over and saw these. I mean, it was at first I looked behind me. I thought this was a reflection from the ship on the ocean. This was only my second cruise. I've been on 10 now. And I turned back around and we were leaving them behind. These things were about the size of a small compact car. They were kind of shaking back and forth, maybe from the wind. I did even notice the one on the top arrow up here. Whoops. That looks, it was kind of coming in camouflage like, like in a cloud, but you can see there's still some kind of a fog above these. It reset my camera from January 25th. Every picture after that began February 5th and 11 hours later. I tried to talk to people on the ship. I talked to everybody I could. They wouldn't let me talk to the captain of the ship. I don't know what it was, but I saw these. This wasn't something that came up on my picture later. I actually physically saw these. Now, I went to Catalina Island a couple years ago, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna take my night vision camera. Maybe I'm gonna see something. I had seen this movie, A Terror in the Sky. They're filming there. They're stationed in Malibu, and then they're stationed on Catalina Island, and they're trying to catch some of the lights that are in between. Some of the ones like I saw, told you about in 1992. Strange things come up there all the time. So I took my little night vision camera. I thought, well, okay, this was from the balcony of our hotel. I'm gonna see if I could see anything. And it's probably a shooting star. But I just thought I didn't have the camera on very long, and I right off caught something. Watch up here in the sky. Look at it. See that? Okay, I go again. Watch something falling down just as we get past these trees. It's right up here in the sky. There. I thought, well, that was kind of fun. So then the hearings. I don't know how many of you have watched these hearings, July 26th of 2023, hearings on disclosure. This is right there. They're interviewing David Grush, who testified under oath over a House site oversight committee, under oath with two former Navy pilots, David Fravor, which I told you about, the one that had sighted the Tic Tac, and also Ryan Graves, who had also seen this. Both of them talked about the November of 2004 sighting that they had experienced off of the Nimitz. Grush answered questions from the representatives about otherworldly things that he had seen, and that he thought that the Congress should be aware of all of this. He also said he knows of people that have been physically harmed in efforts to cover this extraterrestrial activity up, and this has been going on for years and years and years, and that the U.S. is in possession of alien technology and 12 alien craft and the remains of non-human pilots. And when asked, well, were these non-human pilots dead or alive? And he said, you'd have to ask me in the skiff. And they said, well, where are these alien craft? And he goes, same answer to that question. He said, we've got at least 12 alien craft, but in public, I can't tell you where they're located. Well, I found out in the last hearing that he'd lost his health insurance, that they're threatening to take his pension. He has had repercussion over this hearing, and he was promised that he would not. This is a jellyfish that was seen in October of 2018, but reported January 10th of 2024. I'm still kind of not too sure about this. Some people are skeptical. I kind of tend to believe it. I've had other witnesses talk about jellyfish-shaped craft. This was pictures from raw video that was released by Jeremy Corbell. This was caught flying in U.S. operations base in Iraq, flying at a constant speed, moving in one direction, filmed in the Persian Gulf at night. They didn't want to disclose the day or the time, but because it moved over a sensitive military installation and went to Lake Hibernia, which I really couldn't even find. But Jeremy Corbell said that it went into the lake, and after 17 minutes, it came out, and then at such a fast rate of speed, they couldn't even catch it on camera. But the interesting part was that the US UAP displayed positive lift without typical aerodynamic means for lift and thrust, and that signatures normally associated with propulsion maneuvers were absent. Then we go on to the next hearing, November 13th of 2024, called The Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Exposing the Truth. And then here we've got Rear Admiral Tim Gaudet, Luis Elizondo, Michael Schellenberger, and who's the founder of Public, and Michael Gold, all the way over here to the right from NASA. Lou Elizondo, former military intelligence, said he made it very clear we are not alone in the cosmos. Though other witnesses all talked about things that they had seen and enforced the fact that sightings are real and that there are objects, and they have seen objects in the water and coming in and out of the water. They all had their testimony about that. Now, let's go with Michael Gold from NASA. Michael Gold talked about how, well, NASA's taken a lot of film over the years, all the way back, starting, of course, with Mercury and Apollo and the shuttles, and there's hours and hours and hours and hours. And if anybody wants to examine that, I'm sure they may find something, but I don't know. You know, we could examine all this if we had more money. He was basically asking for funds. He didn't really disclose much of anything except for saying, well, there might or might not be evidence out there, but he had no concrete knowledge, really. This was from the Stringfield files. He did a presentation on it at the symposium, and up here, this document was a letter from Gordon Cooper to Ambassador Griffin. This was addressed to the mission of Grenada and the United Nations. And one section that was stated by Gordon Cooper, November 9th, 1978. I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crew are visiting this planet from other planets, which obviously are a little more technically advanced than we are here on Earth. I feel that we need to have top-level coordinated program to scientifically collect and analyze data from all over the Earth concerning any type of encounter, and to determine how best to interface with these visitors in a friendly fashion. We may first have to show them that we learn to resolve our problems by peaceful means rather than warfare. There's an article from the paper Astronaut Gordon Cooper. I've seen, I can't read the rest of it. Basically that he has seen UFOs. This is a statement he made to Leonard Stringfield on May 30th, 1976. Astronaut Gordon Cooper told Stringfield of a recent meeting of NASA personnel. Dr. Fletcher of NASA informed those assembled that we now have a preponderance of hard evidence that Earth is under surveillance by extraterrestrials. Cooper said he expected the information to be blasted across the nation's headlines the next morning, but there was nary a word. These books, I ordered these right on the government book website. Project Cyclops, 1971, Summer Facility Fellowship Program and Engineering System Designed. Primary objective of Project Cyclops, to access what would be required at hardware, manpower, time, and funding to mount a realistic effort aimed at detecting the existence of extraterrestrial, extrasolar system intelligent life. This other one, archaeology, anthropology, and interstellar communication. Now they're trying to communicate. NASA put this out 2014. This collection of essays explores the innovative contributions that archaeology and anthropology are making to contemporary SETI research. Now we've got the hearing September 9th, 2025, House Oversight Committee Task Force on Declassification of Federal Secrets. And then we have U.S. Air Force veteran Jeffrey Nasatelli, U.S. Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer Alexandra Wiggins, George Knapp, U.S. Air Force veteran Dylan Borland, and Senior Policy Counsel at the Project on Government Oversight, Joe Spielberg. all of these people testifying, talking about sightings that they have had. Of course, George Knapp of his investigation for years and years and years, all of them very serious, all of them under oath. Then we had the video that was released. U.S. military Hellfire missile fired from Reaper drone bounces on bright, shiny object being tracked off the coast of Yemen, October 30th, 2024. You can see the first picture here all the way on the left. Right here in the center, this bright object. This is what was moving very fast and low across the water. This drone shot this missile at it. When it hit it, you saw these three little objects here. It bounced off, it spun, and these little objects here kind of flew off of the missile. There's the missile here, and there's the object here, and there's the other object there. So there's video of this, but I figured I was trying to download it, but I thought it would kind of take a long time. I was doing this last night, but look it up online, and it says UFO hit by missile from drone, and you can see the video on this. It bounced off of it. This just happened in October of 2024. We shot a missile at a UFO and it bounced off, probably from the electromagnetic field that surrounded it. So why are alien races colonizing Earth's waterways? I don't know, undetectable travel, bases cities, studying marine life, maybe a secure location to take abductees. Also, maybe they're harvesting hydrogen. And I actually had a chance to ask Lou Elizondo about that. And I said, what do you think they're filtering out of the water? You see some of these craft hovering over the ocean and they're filtering something. And he said, you can't tell anybody, but he said, we believe they're harvesting hydrogen. And we know that NASA early on was using hydrogen to replenish their fuel cells for Mercury and Apollo flights. And I said, Lou, I've already been talking about this for a year, so sorry, too late. Maybe they're harvesting food sources. If you want to know any more about things that are going on in and around the water, I wrote this book a couple years ago. It's 20 years of knowledge that I have, 20 years of information, 20 years of articles and testimony and documents. And I tried to get them all in this one book as a reference guide. First, you have to know what we have underwater, what kind of bases we have underwater. And of course, there's a lot of them are secret, but I found a lot, the best I could, because if you know what is ours, then by process of elimination, you can say, well, what was that? But you can't just assume that anything moving around underwater is alien, because we have a lot of technology too that that's out there, has been for years, and we don't really know about it. If you want to buy my book, it's available on Amazon in hard copy, color, which is kind of expensive. And then look at other formats, because it's also there in black and white, and it's also there in color in paperback. And to wrap things up, and then if there's time, I can take questions. This is going to be my next book, which I'm almost finished with: Deepwater Aliens, Residents, and Abductors. Because what I just got done talking about as far as the abductees that remember being underwater, there's going to be a lot more detail of their lives and what they saw. This was just kind of brief, a brief, I guess, a report on these people here saw something underwater, but there's a lot more detail. And I thought that it's important that we have a record of as many as I could of people who have been taken underwater, because I believe they are. I believe that there's been bases underwater for years and years and years, maybe centuries, maybe, and that people are being taken by these aliens that are residents underwater. They are residents and they are abductors. And I think it's time the truth came out. So, Margie, I hope I'm still online, and
You're still online. Thank you
I'm
very
still
much.
here.
That was
Okay.
very interesting. Okay. Does
Um,
anybody have any questions?
And I wasn't sure how long I
Great.
needed to talk, but
Yeah, no, that was just perfect.
okay.
Does anybody have any questions for Debbie? Okay, well, let's give her a nice round of applause. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, you can get a hold of me through Margie, or you can email me MUFON, MUFON, diver, DIVER @gmail.com. And
Especially if you have any underwater abduction stories that have happened to you.
Oh,
Contact Debbie.
absolutely. Any water related stories. I hope we have some Navy people out there who have seen something. I'd be happy to hear about that because it's out there, it's happening. The government's acknowledging it and they're focusing on water as they should be. So thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.